let's begin here. We're starting at a fashionably late time for a very fashionable exhibition. Welcome to all of you. If there's anybody here who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, I'm Stephen Salel, and I'm the Robert F. Lange Foundation, curator of Japanese art. And this is Lyrically, Rebellious, the Prince of Onchi Kōshirō. Not one, but a team of carvers carving the wood blocks. You had a team of printers taking those carved wood blocks, usually one block for each color in the final design, and printing them in succession. And you had a publisher overseeing the entire project. You had numerous assistants helping everybody. And amidst that, you had this one designer, be it Hokusai or Hiroshige, who did the initial sketch. And if you think about all of the labor involved and all of the time involved with producing a single print, it's kind of ironic that the person who produces this first sketch receives 99% of the credit and is the only person who we really remember. But that was the sort of communal way in which printmaking was done in Japan for 2.5 centuries. And after Japan opened its ports to international trade and began looking keenly towards Europe at the artistic traditions there, a group of Japanese printmakers decided to embrace the ideal of individualism and to work in a more European manner in which a single artist, in order to show his or her thoughts and emotions and individuality, would work on all stages of the printmaking process. And it is that philosophy, that approach to wood block printmaking that we call the Creative Prints movement. Onchi Kōshirō was not the founder of the movement. He came a little bit later, but he embraced it wholeheartedly. He became the de facto leader of the movement. And in addition to that role as leader, he, following some European artists' examples, became one of the first abstract artists in Japan. That is a quick summary of the movement and the artist. And at this point, I would like to invite Elias to come over here. We have a print here that is an interesting introduction to Onchi. It's actually not produced by Onchi, but by his student.
Well, it's a treat to be with you, with all of you here. It's beyond words, really. I've been walking around the gallery and taking everything in, and I encourage all of you to really engage with each print. There's so much here, and Honolulu is so blessed to have such a rich collection from Michigan. And so, yes, we start with a work, funny enough, not by Onchi, but by his main student, his disciple, Sakino. And in this portrait, we find Onchi towards the end of his life. He died in 1955. And so this is early 50s. This is 1952. And he's examining a print that he produced. And this design's kind of important because Sakino is paying homage to one of his most important teachers in life. And how he captures them is very important because he's holding up an abstract work. And as Stephen pointed out, Onchi is credited with being an artist that brought abstraction to Japan. You could get into an argument on who did it first, but 1915 is very early in Japan. And he produced a very important work in 1915 for a publication that he produced in college. And he continued with his interest in abstraction throughout his career. He had to pause it for a bit because abstraction was not accepted in Japan, nor was woodblock printmaking, really, as an art form. But he really wanted to advance the idea of woodblock printmaking as an art form that was legitimate, equally as painting. And so he's held back with the abstraction and thought, well, the better fight is just to make prints that invite people to understand the process and how important printmaking is to Japan and how it could be a creative mode of expression. And so in this print, Sekino depicts Onchi holding a design, a woodblock print design of an abstract design. And I would like to invite all of you to find this print in this exhibition, because it's here.
Wow.
Now, Onchi's prints, I should mention about Onchi's artistic temperament. He became quite bored producing the same design over and over and over again. He did not see woodblock printmaking as a means of duplication. Instead, it was a creative act. So multiple impressions look quite different from each other. And in this print, if you look at the design and you compare it to the one in this gallery, you're going to see a big difference. And that's because that's Onchi's artistic temperament. Every single print, even in an edition of 4, 6, or 10, can be seen as almost as monoprints because of the differences in the printing. He used printing as a means of expression as much as the design itself. And so in this design, Sekino is borrowing from Onchi the format. I mean, one can argue this is a traditional okube illustration, meaning it's a 3/4 length portrait that the Japanese were using. But Onchi was one of the first artists, and if I could draw your attention to those pieces, and I'll be walking over there and talking about them. But that design by the poet Hagiwara inspired Sekino to produce a good amount of work in that format. And so this portrait is paying homage to his teacher because he's showing Onchi in the format that he sort of inherited from him. But also, this design, there's an edition of 20 for this edition, but he also made one edition of 50 and 100 because it was a very successful design. And each impression of this Sekino design, he made sure that the string and elements of the composition are different to, again, pay homage to his teacher who taught him that very thing, to imbue prints with an individuality. Onchi was sort of, there were times when he mentioned, well, he was feeling very, one day he'd be very happy and his prints took on that quality. Another day he'd be very sad, and it's the same design he could have been printing, but there's a somber quality to them. And so with every single work in this gallery, I invite all of you to sort of have a dialogue with the image and see what emotions are invoked in you. Because Onchi really wanted to invite the viewer to experience each work from an emotional perspective. So just to add a little bit about that, these two portraits, this design is one of the most important designs by a Sosaku Hanga artist. It's basically the flagship of the movement. It is a design that was put in many illustrations for reference books. If you look up I think if you look up Sosaku Hanga in Wikipedia, you're going to find this design. And there's a reason for that. This print was produced by Onchi in the darker years leading up to the wars. And it depicts his friend, who was a poet, a surrealist poet, who he befriended when Onchi was in college. And he was a big fan of his poetry. And Hagiwara passed away in these dark years. When you read up on him, they say, well, he drank himself to death. And I'm not sure exactly what happened, but we could see in this portrait done by Onchi's own hand. I invite you to all look at this very closely. The way that Onchi layers the pigments, each layer on top of each other creates kind of a shadow and also texture. And the way that the color, the texture work, there's an emotional response from the viewer. I mean, Onchi's really working on getting an emotional response. And if you look at the eyes are so expressive. So expressive. And so this is a really important comparison because it really speaks to the movement. This is an artist working entirely with his own materials, doing his own design, and the finished print really speaks to that. Now, this was very popular. Everyone wanted a copy of this design. There were 2 impressions done before the war, and when the Americans and other Western forces occupied Japan, they learned about this print, and they all wanted a copy of it. And Onchi struggled. He made several impressions, maybe up to 10. And they, of course, were all very, very different. I happen to own a copy, and mine's quite different from this one. But Onchi's like, no, I'm done. I don't want to make any more. And so he hired Sakino to do 50. Now, we don't have that copy, but we have a later copy by Harai. Sakino sold all 50. And at this time, Sakino was a popular artist himself. And he's like, I'm not going to keep making these Onchi prints. I have my designs to work on. And so Harai was considered one of the top printers of the period of time. He was more of a Shinhanga printer in the sense that he was very academic as when he approached printmaking. Everything is perfectly printed, the lines, imagine a page out of a coloring book. Harai really carefully added the pigment and he made sure that it was very well articulated. But if we look at these 2, it's a world of difference in how the prints look. Now, if we had the third one by Sakino, it's closer to the master's hand, of course. And I should mention that Helen Merritt was one of the first scholars who engaged with Sosaku Hanga and the material of Shinhanga and Sosaku Hanga. And she talked about this print, and she was quoted as saying that Onchi's print was sheer poetry, Sakino's was prose, and Harai's was a scholarly footnote. And I think she's right. She gets the sense that he references the image perfectly, but what is missing is that emotion. And when you look at this print, and I encourage all of you to look at it more carefully, there is this sort of spontaneous wet quality in the printing, and that adds a certain depth to it. It almost is like sculpture. It invites you to look deeper into the image, and it unfolds. Yes?
I wanted to invite our other scholars here to add on to what you're saying. Noriko?
Yes. I'm sorry, Dr. Ajioka will
I'll interpret.
Yes. 本地はその萩原作太郎像をやっぱり今マーティンがおっ しゃったマーティンじゃないエライアスがおっしゃったように非常にその自分の感情をそこに作品に込めたり萩原作太郎に対する彼の愛情だったり悲しみだったりそういうものを込めたかったのでやっぱり平井の方にはそれがちょっと出てこないっていうのがやっぱりその、創作版画の一人が自分で全部やるのと他の人がするのとでは全然違う結果になる。
Okay, as Elias said that the Onchi knew Hagiwara Sakutaro really well, and he always wanted to put his emotion into his work, and that's why he wanted to do everything the way that he had a thorough control of that. So that is the reason, as Elias said, this sort of Onchi has an emotion, his love for his friend, and also sadness of this poet getting really depressed and having a really difficult life. And so he was putting in everything, but you can see Hirai didn't have that emotion, and you can see the difference in that, and that's the point of Sosaku Hanga or creative print.
Any other works that you wanted to talk about here?
Yes. 恩師幸四郎は非常にさまざまなタイプの版画を作品を作ったので理解することがとても難しい作家だと私は思うんですね。
Well, because Onchi created, as you can see, there are so many different types of works. So initially people get really confused and what was actually his work and what did he really want to do.
例えばごめんなさいこの2つの作品なんですけど上の作品はいわゆるコマーシャル販布のための作品売るための作品
So if you can compare those two the two prints side by side, not side after. Okay, the top one was actually commercially distributed. That's for sale.
いやただ下のは、恩師が、自分のその子供と母の愛情を示したいために、売るためではなくて彼自身が作った。
So the one below instead contrast. He wanted to express his love for his wife and the baby, his own son. So you can actually see the difference in how they were made and differently.
それとこちらのこれは非常に油絵にオイルペインティングに近い作品なんですけれどもこれは国が、開催していた非常に大きな展覧会に出品したものなのでまた違う、意識で作っている。
This one he also created, you can see it's like oil painting quality, it's very thick. And again, this is slightly different because this was made to submit to show at the government's very powerful national art exhibition to show it. So again, this is a slightly different context that he made this.
そうで、恩師は、一つの言葉を残していましていろいろな自分っていう文章を書いているんですけれども、恩師はその戦前、日本の中で全く認められない創作版画を社会に認めてもらうために例えば売るための作品それから展覧会に出品するための作品それから自分の感情を表現するための作品というようにさまざまな作品を作ったので日本でも非常に理解が難しい作家の一番難しい作家の一人なんです。
So Onchi himself actually he described himself as there are many me or me's. So as I said, so he made some commercially produced like the prints, and also for the exhibition because he was leading the movement he wanted to promote. At the time, the prints were not considered proper art. So he really wanted to promote the artistic quality of prints. So this is again a different sort of emotion or purpose. And then, of course, there are works that he really wanted to show his personal emotions and feelings. So they are because he made so different styles that even in Japan it's very difficult. He's one of the most difficult artists to understand.
Yes. ただ、彼が一番最初1910年代から「リリック」というタイトルの作品を、作り続けていて、それはでも社会にはなかなか認められない。だけれども自分の感情あるいはエモーションだとか音楽だとか詩だとかそういった自分のやりたい仕事はリリックというシリーズだったんですけども、戦後になるとこういった具象的な作品を全部作るのをほぼやめてしまって彼はアブストラクトに中心に行きます。
Okay, throughout all this period, he was making different types of prints. There was one sort of string or continuity which he titled as Lyrics. That's what he wanted to express. And so that was totally ignored by the artistic art world at that time. But so that's why he had to make all different things. But this lyric series, like poetic, emotional expressions, that he continued underneath throughout his period. But then after the war, after the occupation, he completely stopped any figurative prints and totally he went to abstraction because that's what he wanted to do.
その理由は2つあるんですけど、1つはさっきエライスがおっしゃったように日本に戦後アメリカ人コレクターの人たちがいてでそれによって自分の作品が認められるようになった。そうするとそれまで、彼が本当は作りたくない作品もそのコマーシャルのものだとかあったんですけどもそれをまずやめることができたということですね。
So there are two reasons for that. One is that, as Elias said earlier, that after the war, during the occupation, there were some Americans who really recognized his work and valued. So he had someone to actually understand his work and supported him.
それで2つ目の理由は、戦後になると、日本が、その接種から外れた占領期が終わると日本の作家たちが例えばサンパウロビエンナーレだとかベネチアビエンナーレだとか海外の展覧会に出せるようになる。そうするとその時初めて、日本の油絵でもなく日本画でもなく最初に認められたのが版画だったんですね。それで、その版画というものが非常にインターナショナルなものになったのが非常に音痴にとっては嬉しかったし、その将来その日本の版画というものが世界に出ていくであろうということがあったので彼は自分のやりたい仕事にこう邁進できたということですね。
So the first reason, of course, that he didn't have to make all these commercial things, that's one thing. But the second point is that after the war and after the occupation, like 1950s, that Japanese artists started to participate in international exhibitions, sending work. And what was actually recognized most was not oil paintings or Nihonga painting, but prints. So he could actually see where this was going, and so he must be really, really happy to see the success of that. And so he had no regret or no purpose in making anything else but what he really wanted to make.
そして最後に私は海外に行ったことが一 一度もなかったんですけど、ヨーロッパにもアメリカにも一度も行ったことがなかったんですけども、彼の作品そのものは戦後日本とアメリカの抽象美術展ですとか、そういったビエンナーレだとか、そのインターナショナルな展覧会に送られていたので、恩師は最後亡くなる前にそのことを知って非常に多分嬉しかった。で彼は日本の明日、明後日ので申し上げますけれども、恩師は自分の作品がアメリカのコレクターのところに行こうが全くそれは気にしていなくて、だから日本にはほとんどなかったという、今ないということですよね。
So, okay.
I'm sorry.
trying to put this together. What did she start? Okay, so because the prints were very successful, and Onchi had never actually visited European country or America, not at all. Yet, but he was always like informed by what was going on outside, and when because his works were now recognized after the war, and his prints were actually traveling and shown in the international stages as like abstract art. So just before he passed away, which is 1955, and he knew, and so he must have been very satisfied by that fact.
じゃあラストごめんなさい。日本のその恩師が、亡くなった後、恩師の影響っていうのはレガシーが非常に大きくって、日本のいわゆる新しい若い作家たちが恩師のその非常に自由な発想だとか、その実験っていう精神を受け継いで、さらに新しい版画を作っていったので、私たちが思ってきたよりももっと恩師の影響っていうのは長く広く日本の中でも続いたであろうと私は思っています。
So Onchi's legacy was just so vast that we can't actually see or think about it, because there, like we were talking before, there's very few printmakers that wasn't influenced by Onchi. And even actually Elias was talking just before earlier today, that it continues to be today. And what was their legacy? The two important things is it's a freedom of expression. You can do anything you like. And also the experimentation. And so that's really was very important and long-lasting legacy. That's actually, if I can just make one.
May I mention on that note that if you're interested in seeing some of the works by other artists who were strongly influenced by Onchi, when you get to the end of this exhibition, you go out the doors, down the staircase, around the corner. There's some signage to guide you. But in our Lange Gallery for Japanese prints, we have works by other creative print artists. And you can see the variety of works that these artists made. But bear in mind that, as Noriko said, Onchi was a strong influence and source of inspiration for each and every one of them.
If I can just, sorry. So if you were to try to find Onchi's influence in terms of like styles or anything, you don't see. It's more his free spirit, and one
moments ago we were discussing Onchi's legacy, and really it's his creativity, encouragement of experimentation. And early on we discussed how Susaku Hanga prints differed from the traditional printmaking process where it was collaborative. And when the artists, particularly artists like Onchi, who's so interested in experimentation, when Onchi was working, every aspect of making a wick-lock print became an opportunity to experiment. And when you look at that, your materials become collaborators with the artists to produce the end product. And these three, including this one, belong to a four-piece suite. So the Honolulu has 3 of the 4, and no other U.S. institution has all 4. So this is very close to having all of them. And it's a very important group. And these 3 were done in 1954, which was a very significant year. Onchi produced a good amount of material the year before he died. Some of his masterpieces were produced in 54. And so I can't imagine, well, he must have known something was going to happen, because he produced very large scale prints, very compelling designs, and all 3 here were done with materials that were extracted from his daughter's home renovation. So these pieces of wood are in fact wood taken from her home. And I'll start with this one because this one's quite famous. The background are obviously pieces of wood, but the red design is actually Japanese charcoal that's been cut and inked and stamped by hand. So not the charcoal was not attached to any wood, but actually hand stamped. And so there's 3 other impressions of this design known. And the position of the red shapes are by and large in the same location, but they vary. And we could see here a wonderful sense of rhythm, you know. And of course, for those of you who were here last night, we were treated to such a wonderful concert, and we discussed how important music was to Onchi, and the term lyric, you know, in some of his titles, of course, echo back to that. And these designs, I mean, this one in particular, I really have a strong sense of movements, almost musical. And I mean, the fact that he's using these materials that are not associated with printmaking whatsoever, particularly charcoal, you know, but he gets a wonderful sense of texture. And at the same time, Japanese charcoal is so indicative of Japan. And so he's using these materials that echo the culture of Japan, but in such an innovative way. That you can almost see leaves that are falling, temple floors. You can see so many different things about this design that echo back to Japanese culture. But at the same time, it's abstract. And these 2 other designs, again, these are done with found objects. We're talking about a leaf. This is a net. And this, I think, is the heel of a shoe. It might be. And Statler, an early patron of Onchi, actually, Onchi borrowed the shoe and pushed, inked his shoe and pressed it into a print, and it was part of the prints. And so you could see this whimsical, experimental quality in his designs. And even though they're whimsical, and he is experimenting, the composition is still controlled. It's very tight. And so in all of these, the artist, though a constant experimenter with material means of production, is also completely in control to be able to produce of such a well-articulated design. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for talking about the imagery of these works. I wanted to add that in addition to making abstract prints like this, Onchi was also involved with the production of poetry, and he published various books and illustrated those books in which his poetry is recorded. And I believe that Chiaki wanted to show us one book by him.
Sorry, going back a few steps. Yeah, this is one of actually the book is on this side. One of the books. So from the very start, 1910s, when he started producing prints, that was always with the magazine that Onchi and two other artists produced together. That was called a magazine of prints and poetry. So in Onchi's mind, prints and poetry always together. And later, when he produced some of books like this, as you can see the image, and it's accompanied by his poem, but I don't know whether it's called poem or not. And because he was also a graphic designer, he controlled the size of the particular character and space between lines and the space within lines and the positioning. So with that, he was expressing his emotion in very various ways. But in terms of understanding what he was writing, it's very difficult for Japanese to understand, partly because of his very unconventional use of words, and also I just suspect that some of the words were no longer used. So it's very difficult. And so when Stephen proposed that we should translate those poems, I initially said, no way, we can't do this. But he said, I said, we can't really, Japanese cannot understand, and how can we actually translate? But he said, it's not really fair. If whatever we can in English, at least if we can sort of see some of what he was thinking, and that will be good enough, and people can sort of have a bit of glimpse of his mindset. So we did translations of each poem, and we struggled and struggled. But as I was working on this translation, I realized the way that he was looking at the natural world, and you can see some of the that's too in those three prints of like the worm, and in his hand there's this beetle, and he was very interested in natural worlds, insects, birds, and he was looking at it in a specific way, very personal way. And I sort of initially started looking at the sea, because I really always like looking into the rocks and the sea creatures, and then realized that yes, he was very closely looking at and then designing all the shapes. So the actual animal or whatever there was living creatures and non-living creatures, and he was just putting those together. It's just amazing sense of design. So, however imperfect, you might have a little bit of his go into some of his thinking, and particularly with this spider. And you can, it's very difficult, you have to just come out and have a look later. Yeah. But as he was looking at how the spider wove his web, and just the rhythm and design. So it's not just only abstract, but he was using sort of figurative, but in a more abstract way. So anyway, that's something that's another thing that you can look at. Okay.
A little bit earlier on, Noriko was talking about Onchi's interest in the lyric, the concept of lyrics, and the series titled Lyric that he began in 1914 and continued all the way until his death in 1955. This, in my opinion as well, was one of Onchi's greatest accomplishments. And so when designing this exhibition, I decided to leave those prints for the second half as the sort of climax of the show. And I was wondering if maybe Noriko could, if we could go over and look at those with Noriko's explanation.
本地こちらは詩人でももちろん日本で詩人ともして認められているし、ブックデザイナーっていう面があって、しかも版画家というの3つがあるわけですよね。なので彼は非常に出版ということに対して非常に深い愛情を持っていて、なぜかっていうと自分が全てできるのと油絵だとああいう作品は作れないんですよ。なので詩も自分で作り、版画も自分で作り、それを出版物としてみんなの手に取ってもらえるっていうことがうんちの一番重要なポイントだと思うので、それは自分です。
Another point about the publication of this wonderful image and poetry books, because he was very active, of course, as a printmaker, and also he was recognized as a poet, and also he was commercial designer of books, book design. Yes. So with this production, so he had a very deep sort of what you call it, love for putting all this together, because he could do them all. He could write a poem, draw the design, and then actually design the whole book and then publish it. So by publishing those, he could actually show a lot of people can actually see the work together, and that was one of his very deep love and sort of obsession as well.
今日は1点しか出てませんけれども、彼は写真もやっていたので、飛行観音という本は写真も、全部自分で撮って、イメージを重ね合わせて一つの本を作っていたので、だからその油絵には絶対できない芸術を彼は作っていた。
Sorry, there's one mistake. So one omission that I didn't remember was that what he was doing is something that no oil painter could do. Okay. And so he made several of those publications, and one of them is called the Hikokan no,英語で何でしたっけ? Hikokan no flat?
Sense of flight.
Sense of
yes, that was because he was photographer as well, and he was invited to actually to get on board the airplane, which was of course very new. So he was in there together with so his friends, poet, together. So he had this experience of actually flying. So he was photographing, and expressed. So later on he published this book with his photographs and his impression in a few words, like the poem, and designed the whole book.
Yes, typography.
Typography as well. Yes. So everything is just very
let control.
When I read the poem that he wrote for Sua, the violin, and the expression of the print and the expression of the poem, just incredible. And it reminded me of, but the tradition, I thought, Japanese art, traditional middle, that you painted and you had the poetry on the side, so it was culturally something always, you know.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, because Japan has very old and established tradition of poetry and imagery together. And as you said, like also image and poems are image accompanied by the poem, but also the image itself, like natural objects, have very poetic significance, which is all shared, everybody knew. And so Onchi is in that tradition, yes, and very in a more modern way. Yes, thank you for that.
Is there a picture of this photograph book inside that Bible?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Can we see it?
are there photos?
Photo by Onchi.
Of Sua
Yeah.
or Richard photographs?
He produced not only photo but also photogram and other experimental photo.
Are you referencing the book,
Yes.
The Sense of Flight, Sensation of Flight,
Right.
the photo book?
So
Okay,
talking
it's
about
right.
it.
Yeah.
That's the
It's
Bible.
right
Is
there.
that
I
the
would-
book in the...
There's a feet, I'm looking.
I've flipped through this a million times and I still, for some reason,
And
always
he
skip the
designed
thing I want to see.
over 700 books.
What?
Yes.
He has 700 books?
Yes, he was now very famous as
Design.
a
wow.
He
designer.
designed the cover
Yes.
and then the arrangement. He didn't take the pictures,
Yeah.
but the way that they're arranged on the page. So these embellishments are all his design.
Wow. And since you're Mr. Private Collector, you've touched this book.
This is not
I have a
very
copy of it.
expensive.
You have a copy of the book, so it's a book.
Yeah, it's a book.
Hardcover
Yes,
book.
yes.
It's a book. So you can see portions of the plane, these embellishments with the different aspects of line.
And his lyric theme,
Yeah, these are
right? And his shape.
these are
And his words. Oh, wow.
So arguably this is the most important photo book of its kind ever produced in Japan. And I would say anywhere in the world, to be honest. It's as good as anything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was an amateur photographer, but yes, but he learned a lot from book design because he designed a lot of various books, so poetry or poems, photography, and etc.
Yes,
He
that's a very
learned that
contemporary book.
a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I have to make a correction here. I said Onchi photograph, but no, the photography is different for the particular book. Yeah, but Onchi was also a photographer.
We have about 5 more minutes left. So I was wondering if we could head over here and talk a little bit about
Question.
Just wondering, is all new paintings, is it all result of printing, or was it some kind of graphic? I'm looking at this one over here, and I'm seeing this sort of thing.
Yeah, it is an original paper plate. So, and this is yes.
So he never actually drew, but with the hands.
But you're seeing something because with a brush, you can apply it to whatever thing that you're going to press into the paper. And if you do it in a way onto, let's say, if you're using a paper block and you apply the pigment with a brush, you do get that effect. It prints with correct. Because there's some subtle, you can't, well, I guess you could use a brush to get that, but he was trying to get the effect of printing.
Yes, only
Wonderful, thank you.
Books about Japanese modern literature and Japanese modern art, but Romanticism was a very popular movement in Japan in the late 19th and early 20th century. And when I say Romanticism, I mean both visual art and literature. And so, for example, the poet Shelley, or Charles Baudelaire, these European authors, usually poets, their work was imported into Japan, and several of the earliest creative print artists were publishing romantic poetry. Also in Onchi's era, he was sort of like, if I may, the second generation of the creative print movement. Many of Onchi and many of his friends and compatriots were also writing poetry, as Chiaki said. The idea of lyric and lyricism comes from romantic poetry theory. There was a theorist, Mori Ogai, who lived in Europe for many years and translated works from German into Japanese, including many important works of poetry. And he was apparently the one who coined the term JoJo, lyric. And the way that Mori explained it is that poetry can be divided basically into two categories. One in which rhythm and rhyme were very important, and on the other hand, poetry that was more about the expression of emotions and feelings. And the idea of lyricism is that latter kind of poetry. And so when, beginning in 1914, Onchi, in this magazine that he and his classmates were publishing by themselves, he makes this image, which he entitles Lyric Number 1. And actually accompanying this print, he composed a poem. As Noriko said, when the war began, actually Elias said it, when the war began, this sort of abstract and semi-abstract artwork he had to put on pause because it was considered unacceptable during the wartime. But during the post-war occupation, beginning around 1945, he resumes the series. So you see, before the war, works like this one and these two pieces, and then for many of the works that remain in this gallery, if you look at the dates, they are after the war's finished. But they are really some of the most fascinating works of Onchi because, as I talk about a little bit in the wall text here, they deal with these challenging subjects, non-objective images, non-objective themes like music and poetry, and transforming those works into images. In this series, Lyric on Musical Composition, we have 2 works from that series. He is looking at musical compositions by his favorite composers, such as Igor Stravinsky, and creating an image that shows the same emotions and maybe makes reference to the structure of that musical composition. From that point, these were done in the 1930s. As I said, he picks it up after the war in the late 1940s, and the works go in various other directions. Noriko, would you like to, you've done a lot of research on the Lyric series. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yes, 非常に面白いのが、そう、これはもちろん、ファッション。で、音痴は、日本の社会状況が、例えば関東大震災に、あるいは戦争の時期になると、リリックが消えるんです。
So an interesting thing about the series is that, as I said, the lyric series was continuous, like underneath all the different types. But when there's turning social events like the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923 or the war period, his production of the lyric stopped.
Yes. で、多分だから音痴が表現したいものっていうのがやっぱりその自分の心が高揚しているとか、あるいは悲しみだとか、そういったものが表現できる時代にリリックっていうものが非常にたくさん作られて、そうじゃない時には例えばさっきのあれですね、ポムシリーズ、だからそう自然の、情景だとかを書くことに、彼の中で非常に重要なのはリリックとポエムシリーズの2つだと私は思っているんですね。なので、音痴はリリックには自分の感情、それが例えば死に近づいた時には非常に自分の悲しい感情だとか不安だとか恐れだとかを書くんですけれども、ポエムの方は常に自然との関わり合い、彼はとっても自然が大好きな人だったので、そういった明るい気分をそっちで表現するというようにかなり使い分けていたと思います。ポエムはね、そういうことですね。
So I think in his expression of the lyric and the poem are two very important things. The lyric, he expressed the reason that he had to stop in such huge social upheaval, like events. He couldn't really, because the lyric was to express his personal emotions, sadness, pleasure, and so he couldn't actually do that. But on the other hand, on this period, he was looking into like finding the pleasure in natural objects, observing nature, and that's something that we saw. So those two important subjects that we in his abstract, the work is the lyric and poem.
大丈夫だ。あとはもう一つは戦後になると、音痴は、例えば、色とか形だとか形状だとか構図みたいなその芸術の根本にもう一度立ち返して新しいシリーズを次々と生み出すというのが彼の戦後の作品ですね。
So after the war, in addition to those poem and lyric series, he started things like like objects or line, so looking at the composition. Yeah, so the title shows that he was trying to get into the very basic components of artwork or like what is composition. Yeah, these things, and it's something that I sort of left out earlier on was that the reason that the most important Onchi's post-war works are in America, and that was because Americans were actually appreciating and encouraging him to do what he really wanted to do. So he had no problem just like selling or gifting his works to Americans, and that's the reason that America has such great collection. And like as Elias said, because his editions were very small and each one is very different, so very difficult to see those works in Japan.
Yes.
Today.
And if I could just add one little bit to it, in terms of his lyric series, a lot of them are monoprints. And it speaks to his interest and joy of creating things for himself. And one thing I want to really echo is that it's almost impossible to assemble a collection of what's in this gallery, because he only made one or two impressions of these designs. And so it's incredibly scarce. Most museums don't have an Onchi. I mean, I think the Met has one. The Art Institute is blessed because of the Statler connection. Honolulu, of course, Michener. And the British Museum has a collection because there was a collector from Tokyo. That's it, really. We are extremely blessed in the U.S. to have such a robust collection. But you could travel the world and not encounter his work. And so these designs are incredibly scarce. So it's indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be in a room like this with such rare and important pieces.
付け足していいですかそう日本ではオンチの展覧会は美術館では1900から没後20年は行われなかったんですけれども、ボストン、それからサンフランシスコでは早くにそのオンチが亡くなった、数年後、それから60年代というふうにオンチ展が行われていて、そこはもう日本の評価が非常に遅かったということになるかなと思います。
Yeah, in fact, the Onchi's exhibition in Japan is 20 years after his death, and but soon after, after like 1956, just a year after he passed away, there was some exhibition in Boston, and in the 60s also in America, and that's really shows the difference in appreciation of Onchi's work.
We're pretty much out of time, so I think that what you all said here about how historically important this exhibition is and how blessed we are to have such a collection of work like this is, in my opinion, a wonderful way in which to wrap up this evening. And I thank you for